What's up, guys? So today is the spring quarterly update for Guild Wars 2, and it's taken me massively by surprise. The previous quarterly update, the winter quarterly update, was really nowhere near this big. This was the update that brought core Tyria gliding and the Shatterer. Well, Arenanet have up and doubled, tripled, maybe even quadrupled the size of the patch here. These are the biggest patch notes I have in, honestly, recent memory of all of Guild Wars 2, aside from maybe the patch notes that were listed when the expansion itself dropped. So there's a lot to get through. What you guys are going to see here is, and I'm going to roll into it very quickly, the abridged version of the patch notes. The most important things to me, and some topics are so enormous, I may end up doing them in their own dedicated videos over the next couple of days. But so let's jump straight in, and if you guys want an idea of this, there was a complimentary blog post with this patch from Mike O'Brien, the current game director of Guild Wars 2, and he says, and I quote, that this is essentially a second take on the way the expansion could work. And not only does it affect a lot of Heart of Thorn stuff, but it affects much of the core game too while we're at it. So, here we go. First of all, what you guys are already going to be seeing in the footage, what we opened this video with, are actually a couple of new areas that have come to the game. Don't mistake this. There's a lot of tweaking, a lot of balance, a lot of changes, but not necessarily much new content. Well, here's the new content for this patch. It is on the left side, but it's pretty cool. A new area has been added to Lion's Arch. This is the Lion's Arch Aerodrome. This is what you can see me wandering around. There seems to be some curious little things going on, like the crying tour guide, or the fact that some of these boxes you can actually interact with. But the idea is the Black Lion Trading Company have got control of these airships, these portals that can quickly and for free travel people around Tyria. This is the new raid hub. It has a very practical reason for existing. This keeps people out of otherwise densely populated meta event zone maps when they're trying to meet up people to start raiding, and so you're not taking up valuable player slots on those servers. And hey, we get a new place to explore while we're at it. It's a fully complemented area with its own waypoint. It's got a laurel vendor, a bank, a TP, everything you could need, as well as all these little entrances to various raid wings, and you can kind of see how the devs have set it up. They've given themselves lots of space all around the aerodrome for future patches where they'll add more exits and portals out. You can already see the locked off gateway for wing 3 of the first raid there waiting for us. And then beyond this, a lot of us knew about the aerodrome before the patch came out. But beyond this, there's actually another zone too. This is the special DPS testing area. And with a name like that, you might think it's like a small little functional thing. And yes, it is a functional thing, but it's actually quite a big area. So they've introduced an idea of a kind of tropical cavey area just beneath Lion's Arch with lots of lush plants and foliage there, where an Asura has set up a basic little lab. They're trying to get data about damage, I guess, that people do. And you, as a raid squad, can go in and test your damage. That might not sound too amazing, and for a lot of us, you might look at a feature like that and think, oh, this is just them bringing the game up to par with, say, where Guild Wars 1 was. GW1 had a place in the PvP Isles, the Isle of the Nameless, where you could hammer on this infinite health NPC who would tell you, he would shout at you how much damage your team was doing. It was kind of a nice testing feature. This is kind of that, but far, 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 far better. And why do I say it's far, 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 far better? Well, this golem you can configure in any, this DPS test you can configure in any kind of way you like. You can load it up with every single condition in the game. You can load yourself up with every single boon in the game. You can give yourself a certain amount of boons, but only for a certain amount of duration. You can make the target you're fighting run in circles. You can make the target you're fighting kind of fight back and put like point blank AoE in the area. You can make the target you're fighting very susceptible to conditions or immune to conditions. You can do a lot of stuff, and this helps you play with all your different traits and really test out builds. It's kind of fun that Arenanet put this in here. I think it was born mostly out of the fact our community didn't have too much to talk about for a while back there. But some people really got into a lot of discussion about, you know, the practicality of spreadsheet maths versus in-game maths for Guild Wars 2 and what each class really does and brings to the table. And here Arenanet have given us, as far as I can see, unless it's deficient in some way, obviously the patch is only just released and issues like that will be revealed in time. But if it's not deficient, if we assume that this is as awesome as it looks, this is a really great way for players to go in, whether you're on your own or whether you're with a whole group, to see just how much damage you do and what the best kind of builds are that you can run. And very appropriately so, it is connected to the raid entry area. So this is fantastic. There's something about being in a content drought where all the devs have to do is add a couple of caves and oh my god, they're new maps, and suddenly everything's exciting. And I find myself taking every little second to meticulously explore all the nooks and crannies and see what I can find. Cool place, lots of people around there, and that's kind of one of the highlights of the patch, but certainly is only scratching the surface right now. So, what are the other immediate things you'll notice? Next are, for me, it was the fact that dailies have changed massively, as well as LFG. So LFG, I'm not going to go into all the particulars, the patch notes exactly do. You guys can go in game and have a look at it yourself, but it's more functional now. There is an LFG section for raiding. For a while, it seemed Arenanet maybe didn't want to do this because raiding was never designed to be something you'd pug, but obviously people desperately wanted it. It's very smart to have it on there. LFG was pretty much broken before this patch because everyone would just use like the open world section for a million different things, and now there are much more smartly placed categories that you can actually dump your LFGs in, and people are using it. Like there's a raid section for groups who are looking for more players, and then there's a section of LFG for individual players looking for groups, and on and on and on. I don't think we need to go into the particulars there. Same with the dailies. Now, dailies have exploded in terms of their variety now, and are more rewarding. So now, when you do your 3 dailies for the day, it used to be you just get like 10 AP, and the only people who really went for that were those of us who cared about our achievement points. And as time goes on in Guild Wars 2, I think that slice of the community could be shrinking, and that's because you got new players who come in the game now and they see people are closing in on 30,000 achievement points, and they know they're never really going to get there, so they don't bother. So a lot of people don't care about the daily system. Well, maybe you will now a bit more, because if you do your 3 dailies, they also give you a flat gold reward of 2G, and I actually do think that is high enough to encourage me, even with some of the wealth that I've accrued in the game and the fact that I'll be playing a lot more dungeons and things because of this patch. We'll get to that in a second. Even with that, I think I'll want to do more dailies now. That's great. That's clearly better for everyone in the world who didn't care about just AP. And then the dailies themselves, there are a lot more options for you. For a while, a long time ago, they did have, hey, daily jumping puzzle in there, or they had like a bit more variety, but then it got culled away. Well, it's back now. So there's a lot of new things that you'll find yourself doing. I've actually got some footage here of the daily for today, which is the jumping puzzle. The day of the patch this is, in the Fields of Ruin. And loads of players were there. I used to love this when they used to do daily jumping puzzles, and it looked like it's back. So you've got that, you've got daily mini dungeons to do, you've got daily straight up dungeon paths that you can do. Lots of choice, and every day at least there'll be something more interesting than kind of the crappy system we were in around when Heart of Thorns released. So those are pretty big changes and quite immediately obvious ones. Let's talk about dungeons. This, to me, I don't know, speculatively, because obviously the patch is very new, I haven't played too much of it yet. Speculatively, I think this is going to be the biggest change for me. Dungeons are back. That's basically the most blunt way I can put it. They have gone back and on their ideas at Heart of Thorns to reduce the rewards of dungeons and push them back to where they were, and then some on top. So you're getting a lot more tokens for your dungeons, you're getting a lot more gold from your dungeons, and there's a repeatable achievement associated with them now, which means if you do 8 unique paths, for every 8 unique paths you do, and this is, so if you think of each dungeon as 3 paths, this is basically 2.5 dungeons. When you do that, you get 5 gold straight up and another 150 tokens of your choice. So suddenly dungeons and doing a range of dungeon paths is every bit as good as it was before Heart of Thorns, and it kind of pushes the game back towards that 5-man content joy scenario we were in before. Back when before Heart of Thorns, when dungeons were one of the main things everyone did, yes, all you tended to see were a lot of complaints from people. The fact that dungeons hadn't been updated, the fact that the devs had basically abandoned them a long time ago, and there was a lot of upset there, but clearly people were finding joy in the format, and it didn't do any good when they were disincentivized deliberately in favor of pushing to people for fractals. I think Arenanet have identified that quite obviously now. This is a great change for the game, and I definitely do know for a fact that as a player, I spent a lot more time in Guild Wars 2 in general, back when I felt like doing a daily dungeon run with some guildies was on the table versus after Heart of Thorns, when it absolutely was not. And I actually think that if someone were to ask me, hey WP, you know, in a year's time, WP, what in essence was the spring update all about for this year? I would turn around and I think I'd say to them, this encouraged a lot more 5-man content. Because not only has this brought 5-man back to Heart of Thorns, because not only here have they improved just the straight up rewards of doing the dungeon content again and breathed a lot of life back into it, they've actually looked at some things that were always a bit amiss. For example, Aether Path I will still maintain, and I don't believe this is me being elitist particularly, I still maintain that if you have a group who does it consistently, Aether Path is not a problem. However, that said, it's not always easy to get a group that can do Aether Path consistently, and Aether Path is one of the longest dungeons out there. So it's always felt kind of unrewarding that there's this great skin set associated with Aether Path, but the odds of getting one of those skins was so low. Well, the rates of that have been increased. Arenanet have actually looked at what people are saying. Hey, Aether Path was cool, but the rewards weren't good enough. And finally, they've buffed the rewards in addition to this other stuff. So that's great. It's done a lot for 5-man, and not only on the dungeon side of things, but Fractals too. So, there are an unbelievable amount of changes to Fractals. I definitely didn't expect this. We saw a trailer for the patch a couple of days before it went live, in which we saw that finally the Fractal back piece, the legendary back, is now available. And that has come in the patch, but that is only scratching the surface of everything that's happened in Fractals. They seem to have come upon this idea where, as they go forward now, various elements of Fractals are going to be overhauled or changed. So one of the biggest changes for Fractals this patch is the Cliffside Fractal. This is the Fractal, for those of you who are a little unaware, where you fight the legendary Arch Diviner to release, basically, Dr. Manhattan, set in the mythical period of Guild Wars lore that nobody really knows how it connects to anything else. And it's a very long Fractal where you're climbing quite high up. There's a lot of jumping puzzle elements strewn about it, and many times you'll find players who struggle with that kind of stuff. So this has kind of been a big focus on this patch, not their only focus, but for Fractals, where they've overhauled a lot of things. For example, that first fight with the Arch Diviner isn't there anymore, because they're saying, well, why make you fight it twice? We're trying to make this Fractal run a bit quicker. And then the final boss's mechanics have changed a huge amount. Basically, they explain this, that the idea of Fractals is that they're easy at the start, but as you continue to rise in scales, they get harder and harder and harder. And it's not just because enemies are doing more damage and becoming more bullet spongy, right? It's because there's actually new mechanics to interact with. And what they didn't like about the Cliffside Fractal, and many Fractals in general, I'd say, is that there weren't really ever many new mechanics. If you fought him at scale 7, it was the same as fighting him at scale 94. It was just a bit harder in terms of the numbers. They didn't like that. So they've demonstrated here a lot of changes to the final fight that makes it more scalable. For example, like the cages will now start applying Torment. A new mechanic becomes available at the higher scales. And one thing that I find particularly interesting that I hope to see taken through to a lot of Fractal-based stuff is the way they are scaling break bars. So break bars were added with Heart of Thorns, but weren't ever really treated specifically interestingly in the Fractals. Well, now they're talking about how the Arch Diviner at low scales has an ability with a break bar associated, and at low scales you get a really long time to hit that break bar. But later on, it's mechanically more difficult because the window to hit the break bar is so much shorter, so you've got to be more on the ball, you've got to be more attentive. And these are the kind of things I think that Fractals will benefit in general when they scale those kinds of things more than just, oh, enemies are hitting me a lot harder. I'm excited about that, and though the Cliffside is the main focus this patch, there have been a ton of other changes elsewhere in the Fractals. I'm not going to go into all of them in this video, or it's just going to become unbelievably long, but in the coming days, as more important things start becoming apparent to me, I will definitely let you guys know about those. For example, many of the instabilities changes have been tweaked. I told you guys a long time ago when Heart of Thorns came out that I did kind of want to climb to scale 100, but I wasn't going to do it until they fixed Fractals. Now may finally have been the patch, and this has completely blindsided me. I didn't think this was going to happen to me. This may have been the patch that's finally made me decide, right, yeah, I actually want to have a look at them. So that's going to be one of my goals that's come out of this patch, and once again, even more 5-man content. Absolutely fantastic. All right, moving away from the 5-man world, there is another big immediate feature a lot of people are going to notice when they log in. I do want to talk about it, but for not too long. The devs dedicated a lot of patch notes to this. I think it's a smart move that they've made here, but not too noteworthy. Now, they've given everyone a level 80 boost if you own Heart of Thorns. So remember that there was that quote a while ago where they basically said there were less people converting from free-to-play accounts into Heart of Thorns accounts than they expected. Remember that? Well, I guess what they're doing is trying to address that. Essentially, what you're going to have now is you're going to have free-to-play players come into Guild Wars 2, and then they're going to realize if they buy the expansion, they can instantly boost themselves to level 80. It makes sense. It's kind of funny when I look back on the original design ideas for Guild Wars 2 where they were talking about, oh, the game feels exactly the same at level 1 as it does at level 80. There's no difference at endgame. And now we're in a place where, you know, they're selling expansions based on a sudden level 80 boost. But so anyone who gets the expansion can take one character and boost it to level 80, give it a full set of gear, give it decent builds. And not only this, but this item that boosts you to level 80, you can even run in a trial mode, you guys should be seeing on screen right now, where it takes you into the Silver Waste on kind of a temporary build that you can play around with and try out. And if you don't like it, you can just revert yourself back down to the original level you were with the original gear and things that you had back then. So it's quite nice. And again, don't forget the main thing about this patch, though, we haven't talked about much just yet. It's all about Heart of Thorns and making Heart of Thorns more accessible and reducing the grind on Heart of Thorns and getting people to the expansion more, keeping the population on those maps higher. So this is great for all angles for Arenanet. And the nice thing as well that fosters a lot of goodwill is this new item, this level 80 boost. Basically, everyone's getting right now if you're an active player. This is coming in a free account-wide inventory slot. So now, when you buy Heart of Thorns, not only do you get a free level 80, but you get a free inventory slot that is account-bound and shared across all characters. These are what people were paying quite a lot of gems for just to get, and you could only get 5 on your account before now. So you're obviously wondering, does this new slots conflict with the original 5? It doesn't. So I have 6 account-bound inventory slots now because I already had 5 before the patch, and now Arenanet have just given me and everyone else who owns the expansion another one for free. And then you use the level 80 boost and you can use that slot for whatever the hell you like. So that's really nice. I think this is one of the main things. Everyone's like, yeah, Arenanet, you're very cool. And I think they've managed to stifle a bit of the unhappiness that has, been brewing pretty big time over the past couple of months. So yeah, that's the level 80 boost. There's more particulars to it, but just try it out and you guys will hopefully see how that works. 3 other big things. Obviously, right now we've just been talking about PvE. Let's look at some of the other game types. PvP, again, a ridiculous amount of changes, but a lot of focus this patch has gone onto the 2 maps, Spirit Watch and Skyhammer. So Skyhammer, for example, has way less, basically no areas with these little platforms now that can CC you off. Makes the map feel far less cheesy. The entire mechanic itself has changed in Skyhammer now, so that kind of the cannon event will only spawn at a specific time, and the entire map flow and play has been altered, all right? So your opinions of Skyhammer before this patch and after this patch should be completely different because the map, though aesthetically similar, now plays very differently. The same could be said for Spirit Watch. Spirit Watch, they feel, is actually quite close to being a map you could play in ranked, but it needs some tweaks. So Spirit Watch has changed to have a bit more focus on the conquest elements of the map, less the capture the flag style elements of the map. They're basically saying these new 2 iterations of these PvP maps are flagged as beta right now, and with any luck, with the right feedback, and if they're not too far off the mark, eventually we might even see these come into ranked play, which is great because more map variety in ranked queuing is only going to be healthy for PvP in general. And this obviously comes with a great timing that ranked has just gone away. People can only play unranked right now where these maps exist, and it's something more fun for people to do who are already missing the ranked queues because the season has closed out. So that's really cool. And then also with PvP, lots of fixes to spectator mode, more improvements, less clutter on the UI, makes the game more readable. They automatically turn off camera shake, stuff like that. This is great, but I still think that the community at large would benefit so much more just being if everyone could just spectate instead of like a particular few, or it feeling like there's these barriers to it. I look back at GW1 and how in any outpost you liked, you could just press the spectate button and oh look, there you go, I'm looking at some top ranked games. But the solution to that for Arenanet and Guild Wars 2 might be far more difficult than in Guild Wars 1, because I'm not sure that they can save games that we could then later go back and spectate. But maybe that's a whole discussion for another day. And then there's just some very minor quality of life for all maps, but the big one, really big, and I think that most people won't appreciate how big this is, but especially for your average gamer, Mr. Joe Blogs, who doesn't have a really powerful PC, is trying out Guild Wars 2's through PvP through free-to-play, for example. It's kind of always been an annoyance in PvP where you die and you hit a loading screen to respawn. Guess what doesn't happen now? There's no more loading screen. Don't know how the devs exactly changed that, but you don't hit a loading screen on respawn now. So there's no like weird wonkiness where some people suffer for, 5-second longer respawn timers just because they're hitting longer loading screens than other people, which totally was a thing. So that's pretty nice on the PvP side. Next big change, and I'm definitely going to do a dedicated video on this, but is scribing. So this was one of the biggest things that we knew was changing with this patch. Heart of Thorns added a lot of cool features, and many of those were guild-based features, many of those were decoration-based features, but these were so hard to take advantage of, especially with the way that guilds interact with scribes, interact with world versus world, by the way. A lot of this stuff sucked because Arenanet had this idea of scribes that a guild would support a single scribe. And so scribing was going to be very expensive, but hey, you'd have like a handful of scribes per guild, and it was kind of this community-driven thing, because when you are a scribe, you don't get any personal benefits from that. You only get guild-based benefits. Well, here's the thing, that whole logic didn't quite hold up. First of all, you locked out scribing to be way too difficult for your average person, and most people never even looked at the system, myself included. I'm like a very low-level scribe. But also, even this idea that scribes only crafted stuff the guild in general would benefit from and that they wouldn't feel personal reward from is kind of wrong too. Because when you look at decorations, and when you look at projects like I did a recent video this week where we built like a version of the Super Adventure Box in Floating Islands in the Sky, what you've got there is a human being on a personal level scribing stuff and getting personal satisfaction out of it because they are building through their decorations their own personal little area, you know, that they're decorating. Maybe they're building a little house or a jumping puzzle or whatever. You are getting personal satisfaction out of that. So it makes sense to put scribing costs more on an individual level, and that's what this patch is hoping to do. There's a lot of blunt changes that just straight up reduce the cost of a lot of things. So right now in the guild halls, for example, you can get decorations that have nothing to do with scribing for what it's worth, but before the patch they cost 50 silver each, and now the price of them has been like halved, right? Just like across the board, just straight up, hey, everybody should be able to get this stuff easier. That's very much on theme with a lot of the Heart of Thorns based changes. I'm going to learn to scribe after this patch, and I will give you guys my story and my details and exactly how that feels very shortly, once I've actually managed to get some progress on it. That's scribing and the guild stuff, and then finally we have world versus world. I know I sound like a broken record. Oh my god, guys, there's loads of changes. World versus World, I feel a little bit ashamed to say that I'm not too good with the patch notes here because I don't play too much World versus World, but I will give you the big changes. And there are big changes here. High level. Number one, world linking. So the current state of World versus World is that it's so dead, so few people have been playing it, and there are so many servers, many of the servers just didn't have population to support interesting matchups. So there's this thing they've done called world linking where various servers have been combined together into the same matchups. And this has thrown a lot of things off with the matchmaking, so matchmaking's been reset too. So if you think you know World versus World and where your server generally stood up before this patch, you don't know it anymore. Everything's to fight for. Matchmaking's been reset. You can have a lot of new allies and a lot of new enemies, and generally much higher population and activity in World versus World, which is what that format needs to thrive, right? So this is great. That's obviously one of the biggest changes. On top of this, though, there are now World versus World rewards tracks. You know how when you're PvPing, you can open up the PvP window and there's reward tracks, and then as you PvP, you can choose what kind of rewards you get based on different geographical regions of the world and so on. Well, reward tracks are now in World versus World too. This solves a lot of problems with the rewards in World versus World and the way that loot is given out. If it worked for PvP, why can it work for World versus World, I guess they're saying. And so that's all now a big thing over in World versus World. There's, for the first time in a long time, a new World versus World skill tree you can go for. This unlocks something called the Provisions Master. I believe he's the Provisions Master. There's an NPC that you can spend lots of badges of honor in, so there are new badges of honor sinks. You can now get cultural armor from World versus World, discounted cultural armor by also spending badges of honor. You can get really good food that's almost as good as top tier food, except it costs just like 5 badges of honor to get, and supposedly is really undervaluing the food market, which is kind of crashing at the moment now. There's through the new World versus World reward tracks, a new World versus World specific set of armor, very similar to how we had the Glorious armor for PvP. Well, they've done the same thing for World versus World there too, and so people can go for that unique thing there. Loads of changes specific to the Desert Borderlands. Don't forget that the Alpine Borderlands is coming back. Don't forget that they've changed a lot of the way that the Resurrection game plays, and a lot of skill balance changes and things as well have affected World versus World, but I'll get to those in just a second. UI changes, the works. If you were interested in World versus World, and the thing you hate most about Guild Wars 2 these days is that World versus World has been sucking, this patch may have breathed some real life back into it. Alright, man, this is crazy. I haven't done a video with so many relentlessly positive changes for the game in such a long time. All of this stuff is fantastic. Alright, now we're going to get to the miscellaneous section, which, I don't know, I find these changes to be quite, some of the more interesting ones, right? Like, it's not like a massive overhaul here and there. They're just, like, fun, nice changes and good quality of life. The first thing I have to praise and sing from the mountainside. You can now specify quantity at vendors. All right, so look at the footage right now, guys. Look at it. Look at how well this is. Oh, bravo, Arenanet. Look at how well you've done that. So now when you're buying stuff from vendors, you can just click a little arrow up or down. And as you click it, you can choose how many you're going to buy in that one click. And it will dynamically update the actual price of that item when you're buying in that large quantity right there. And then you can accidentally buy a bunch of bags like I did. This is really useful for so many things. It's the kind of thing that people say, wow, this should have been here at launch. I'm not a big believer in the logic that it's too little too late. I really am not a big believer in that. But it has been a long time, and it's very nice to see Guild Wars 2 finally has this very, very basic feature that RPGs all over the world generally have. Another cool little change. These are just miscellaneous little things. This is not everything. These are just the ones that really speak to me. Magus Fools has been referred to consistently throughout Guild Wars 2 since Heart of Thorns came out. Magus Fools this, Magus Fools that. But it's been really inconsistent in its consistency. Why is this term here? What exactly is it referring to? Well, they've just cut that away now. Basically, it's the Heart of Maguma. And anyway, you saw Magus Fools being said before, just to clear up any kind of confusion and, you know, weird haziness about that, it's just the Heart of Maguma. So that's no longer there. There was an interesting note on the patches that I haven't managed to view in-game yet. Could potentially be awesome. They say that loading screens now have helpful information and tips that appear at the top of the screen. Well, this could be very cool. I wonder what the tips actually are that the devs are offering us here. Again, as I say, I haven't seen it. We have noticed that Arenanet have had this kind of technology for a while. They advertise their Twitch streams, for example, while they're going on at the top of loading screens, and I guess they're doing this again, but just with more generic information about the game. It's nice, and one of my favorite features from the alphas and betas that never made it into the launch of the game was when we used to get lore during loading screens, and I wonder whether this is their opportunity to bring that back. That'd be so cool, but I'll try not to jump the gun on that. You can now join squads any way you like by clicking on their icon just in the map. This is really useful for people organizing the Heart of Thorns map metas and things, and that's obviously going to be a nice change going forward into future expansions as well. And that's something I think you guys should pay attention to when we get to the Heart of Thorns specific stuff in a second. If Arenanet get this patch right, they're going to get a lot of stuff right, in theory, with future expansions, because a lot of this is finding their feet of how they deliver rewards and events and structure their future maps and the systems that are in the game. They're finding their feet. And now that, you know, these basic things like, oh, I can join on a squad far easier. Squad joining works with LFG. These kinds of core principles of how they reward us, of tying people to schedules for map rewards rather than just being able to do the odd event and feel rewarded. These kinds of things, if their design is right on these and this feels satisfying to us as players, this is what we will see the team working on Expansion 2 goes for. And this means that when Expansion 2 comes out, they get it right out of the gate. So that's something very important to consider. So yeah, the squad implementation on the maps now is a little bit better, and it's a little bit better on LFG too. Adventures have had a really foolish bug with their leaderboards, in that lifetime leaderboard accomplishments and records could get cleared on daily reset. So yeah, this means that there were circumstances in which I could complete an adventure better than anyone else has ever in the history of Guild Wars 2. I rightfully earn my #1 spot on the adventure leaderboard, and then daily resets and it goes away. Yeah, if that's been happening since Heart of Thorns, I can see how that would undervalue the fun behind the adventure system, which, yeah, in principle, I thought was one of the best things that Heart of Thorns actually managed to deliver. They say that there was a bug in Queensdale in the level 1 to 5 zone where an event wouldn't start, and they fixed that bug. Does this mean that there's an event I've never seen since, you know, the alphas and betas were a long-ass time ago that now has started again? Now that I think about it, I don't think I've seen the rabbit event happen for a while, or maybe it's that escort event that I vaguely remember seeing a long time ago leading into the garrison from Shaymore. I don't know, or it could be something very basic. It could be the toxic oozes in the fields. It could be that this event procced most of the time anyway. It's just a rare circumstance that didn't happen. There are a lot of events in early Queensdale. There is a new NPC added to Lion's Arch. Really doesn't mean anything for the 99% of all of us, called Soothsayer Jacinda, who will fix personal story blocking bugging issues related to like that around level 70 area because of all the overhauls and things they did to the personal story a long while ago. And there are a few changes to personal story too, but there's no need for us to go into those here. And last of all, that consume all option we saw get applied to Magic Find, well, that now is applied to transmutation charges as well. I can't imagine the player who gets like stacks and stacks and stacks of transmutation charges built up, but if you are that player, you can now just right click and go consume all. That's fantastic. Some other exciting stuff from the Black Lion update. Obviously, it's a Guild Wars 2 patch. They're going to update the gem store. Now, The first notable thing would be that the new Black Lion weapon sets... hold out here for a second. Look at the Warhorn, guys. Look at the Warhorn. Does this not look like the three-headed beast that was attacking Lion's Arch? In the concept art before Heart of Thorns? Is it a reference? I think so. Well, or maybe not. It's a kind of cool set, but the more interesting thing is not that. It's not the new outfit that's come into the game, which I really take much joy in sharing with you guys, but it's the additional 5 shared inventory slots we can buy again. So you guys have to remember, last time they put these in the game, this was a huge thing for them. It was a huge thing for everyone. We loved these inventory slots, these account-bound inventory slots, and we get another 5 now. So yes, you could have 5 before the patch, then you get a 6th for free if you own Heart of Thorns, and now you can buy another 5, which I went ahead and jumped on straight away, for a total of 11 account-bound inventory slots now. And now we're getting to a number where you can maybe start putting gear in there, or you can start putting a lot more food in there, and the system's getting even more practical, even better. There's something really cool about getting more inventory slots on my character that I just very much enjoy, and this was certainly something that put a big smile on my face. Also, they changed the TP a little bit. You can now ping stuff directly off of the TP, and there are a couple of changes and tweaks to the way that some of the filters work. Woo! Okay. Next little section of the video, I'm going to fly through as quickly as possible. This is something we could linger on for 40 minutes to an hour. But I'm going to fly through as fast as I can. Skill balance. All right. So, yes, we did get a full load of skill balance. Arenanet kind of integrated into the patch notes their descriptions for what they were trying to accomplish with the skill balance right there and then. Same as they used to do with Guild Wars 1. Generic stuff, first of all. And this almost isn't skill balance, but it is such a cool change. I think you guys are going to love this. I certainly did, okay? You guys might remember a while ago that Shaman data mined some new ground target effects for the classes. I think this may have even been data mined before Heart of Thorns. So if you look at the footage right now, on my Elementalist, if I try to cast a Lava Font, a Meteor Shower, whatever, now I have my own exclusive Elementalist-themed ground target reticule. And when I'm on a Mesmer, it's going to be different. When I'm on a Necromancer, it's going to be different. When I'm on a Warrior, it's going to be different. So there is that extra little bit of flavor. And I know that this kind of thing to a lot of us as kind of seasoned players doesn't mean too much anymore. But it's this kind of thing, I think, that really will appeal to people when they return to the game, when they plug it back in, they load it up for the first time after several months, and they're like, oh, this feels kind of different. This is a nice change. Not only that, but there is a practical tweak here too. The outer ring of combo fields now pulses a certain color, making it really easy to see what kind of combo field it is you're in or you're going to try and blast in. So like if you're going to blast in a fire combo field, there's now a nice orange ring around the outside, or if it's a chill field, it will be a white ring. It's just a nice improvement to the UI, and something I would quite ashamedly so rate very high on my list as favorite things from this patch, despite all the much more important changes they ended up making. Also, people didn't like this change. Arenanet a while ago nerfed the visual flare to the Elementalist Fireball Staff auto attack. To be honest with you, I never really understood all the complaints. I stood by Arenanet's change, and I would still stand by them with their change, but they've abandoned it. They've gone back to the old Ellie Fireball. My logic for defending the nerfing of the visual flare on this effect is that it's an auto attack, and I do think the game has serious problems with lacking spectatability. And I probably only care as much about that as I do because, you know, I make videos about this game all the time, and I want people to be able to click the videos. I want people to be able to see general Guild Wars 2 gameplay and understand what's going on. And I think wherever Arenanet can get rid of obnoxiously large flashy effects without it mechanically seeming like a mistake, the better. But something about this change really ticked people off. We liked our old fireballs, and Arenanet have given them back to us. There's also a new effect LOD option, which will cull other players' effects and things, hopefully a bit better. I haven't played with this too much just yet, but we'll see how it works in the long term. And that's about it for, like, graphical balance stuff. So, kind of global changes. Life stealing was standardized. So, life stealing has always been a bit weird in Guild Wars 2. There's been lots of different ways to get life steal across lots of different classes. But the way that life steal scaled has never had a rigid set of rules. So, for example, does this version of lifesteal scale with power? Does it also scale with healing power? Do they scale independently? Is it a flat amount? How does it work? What's the internal cooldown on when things can proc? Well, they've standardized all of that across, you know, world finishers, projectile finishers, foods that lifesteal, all that kind of stuff. Hopefully now we have a proper rigid system, and having a rigid system will hopefully open them up in the future to play with lifesteal a bit better in their game balance, specifically when it comes to stuff like blood necromancers or thieves thieves with their venoms, or even revenants have got a bit of life still going on, and so on. All right, so that's one thing. Next is a huge change that primarily will impact world versus world. And it's a change to stability. So I'll try to explain this problem as best I can to you guys. Once upon a time, stability was a boon that made you immune to CCs. And the only way you would lose that boon is if it timed out, or if somebody deliberately stripped it or converted it on you. If you had stability, it didn't stack in any kind of intensity, it would stack in duration, and as long as it was there, you were immune. Then Arenanet changed stability, and I think, from a design perspective, a pretty good reason. They realized that this old version of stability they had in the game was kind of binary. It was either you were getting CC'd or you weren't. And if they made it stack intensity, it would be a bit more interesting, in that, take a large world versus world fight. A player is faced with running through a choke, and a bunch of enemies have dropped loads of CCs there. Fear walls, static fields, unsteady grounds, walls from guardians, loads of stuff to stop them from moving. Now you've kind of got a more dynamic combat system where the team trying to push through that choke are stacking up as much stab as they can. Everyone's spamming all their stab shouts, and they're spamming their hollowed grounds, and they're trying to get, 25 stacks of stab, and then they can push through. And as you run through this wall of blocking CC, slowly the stab stacks are getting stripped down, and then finally you break through to the other side. And it's more interesting. It's not so binary. I think this is a good idea, but because of the availability of stability compared to the availability of CCs, what this basically did was, instead of being dynamic, it put us into an even more binary situation where you basically just couldn't move through the chokes like this. And one of the more interesting elements of Zerg v Zerg combat in World vs. World under the old stability system, where Zergs would push in and clash together in these nice melee train headbutts together that were all very intense and exciting, this was basically just killed. And what we ended up in was what people are calling the pirate ship meta, where basically everyone just ranges each other all day. There's no good balance between ranged combat and melee combat for Zergs fighting one another, and you just kind of skirt around one another a lot. And so far as I've been told, as you guys know, I don't World vs. World too much, this really hasn't been so fun, and I can understand how we ended up in that situation. So this patch, this simple change to stability on the surface, will have a huge ramification on the way that World vs. World plays, and hopefully push the gameplay for Zergs v Zergs back into a place where more people enjoy it. We'll see how it goes. So what is the change that they've made? Well, now, when you would lose a stack of stability, you can only lose one stack at a time every 0.75 seconds. So this essentially has made stability a lot stronger. Now when you're the Zerg running into this deadly choke, filled with lots of things to try and stop you getting through, you're only going to lose a certain amount of CC unless the enemy team spreads their CCs out all perfectly, and you're basically going to gain ground. You are almost guaranteed to gain ground. And this helps stability compete more with the overabundance of ridiculous amounts of CCs that people can drop in the game. And hopefully this will push things into a place where people are having more fun. How you exactly decide exactly at what interval the stability can be stripped and how that impacts the balance of everything, I can't even begin to imagine. But the proof will be in the pudding if Arenanet got it right, and suddenly people are having a lot more fun out in World vs. World. And though this is a big thing motivated by World vs. World, this is a global change that will affect everywhere in the game, as is, the standard for Arenanet. Moving on, more like global general changes. They've changed the way that quickness and slow formulas work, which has had a lot of profound effects, but since this video has gotten so long, I guess I'll skirt over that for a second. In PvP, just in general, the sigil of nullification, which is the sigil that strips boons, has had its internal cooldown halved. I still don't think the sigil is going to be good enough to see much play, but it's a good start, and it's in keeping with their shaving idea. And PvP has seen the addition of 2 new amulets. One of them is the Demolisher amulet, which is kind of like Marauders, in that it's very, very offensive, but instead of vitality, you get toughness. And the other one is Destroyer. And Destroyer is something I'd actually quite like to see in PvE. It's power, precision main, both of those, and then minor, it's condition damage and ferocity. This is the 4-stat offensive combo that a lot of us have been drooling over the thought of in PvE for a long time. The only problem with it, if it does come to PvE with Living World, is its precision major stat, when ideally you'd want like ferocity to be the major stat instead. But still, it's a cool thing that you can run in PvP, and is in keeping again with their ideas of, remember, trying to make the game deadlier. And that is pretty much going to be one of the biggest themes of all of the individual class changes. So I'm going to roll through these very quickly, okay? Elementalist, this is my main. It's going to be one of the ones I spend most of the time on, and you're going to see how little time I spend here. They've buffed the Scepter. They're trying to get people to be more interested in Scepter. Specifically, the auto attacks of Scepter suck, and they've improved those. They've also improved the heal on the Water Trident, which might mean we see some interesting play on kind of supportive Scepter builds. And they've made Rock Barrier, the skill 2 that you can toggle for either defense or offense. They've made that apply bleeds, so it's actually a better Condi weapon. Now, whether that's really going to push it anywhere, I'm not too sure. But I do like that Rock Barrier skill because it's 100% projectile chance and it can inflict burns and stuff. Also, Staff Ellie Fireball has gone back up to what it used to be. I think it's had a 17% buff, so Staff Ellies are even better now. Good job there, Arenanet. That's awesome. Guardian. The main theme I would say of Guardian is they've reduced the recharge on a lot of stuff. In fact, across the board, they've reduced the recharge on loads of things. You guys will have to look at the specific notes. There's a link in the description if you want to hone in on your one class. But also, all these skills that would have affected infinite numbers of players in World vs. World now don't. So that's the same for Ellie as well. Like a static field, they now hit just 10 people and then I guess dissolve maybe, or just don't have an effect anymore after that point. True Shot also saw a big damage nerf, and they do state in the World vs. World section, this is because of World vs. World, because of the ranged gameplay that there was an overabundance of in World vs. World, a lot of it was exchanging True Shots. So that's been nerfed everywhere in the game, but mostly motivated by World vs. World. Engineer, they changed Slick Shoes. I was expecting this, having played a lot of Season 2 PvP, and Slick Shoes will now only hit one target per time you cast the skill. That's a huge change to that. Also, a slight nerf to the heal turret, which I'm kind of happy to see because a heal turret's always been such a no-brainer heal for people to use. Sneak Gyro also had a bit of a cast time put on it, and the Shredder Gyro has had its duration halved, but a 600% damage boost. So a very different skill in the way you would use it now. Mesmer, also like the Elementalist, had a lot of Scepter changes. They're basically putting a lot more flat damage on Scepter, trying to improve it a bit more. They've dropped the recharge of a lot of wells. You're going to see that happen on the Necromancer too, but for the Mesmer, I think specifically, this is because the wells were originally balanced with Alacrity in mind, and Alacrity was later nerfed. And so, yeah, moving on to the Necromancer. Necro, curiously enough, had some audio changes. So the Well of Corruption now has different audio, so do Bone Fiends. Their like ranged projectiles have new audio on them. Spinal Shivers had a big damage buff. This is great because one of the most fun things about playing a power Necro in PvP is when that Spinal Shivers slams someone right off of maybe one of your Lich auto attacks when they hit less than 50% health because of the trait, and they just explode, and those explosions are going to be even bigger now, and that's great because as we've seen, power Necro really isn't as strong as people thought it was going to be before Heart of Thorns came out. You know, you really don't see too much greatsword usage in particular. Unfortunately, the saddest change for me was for Necros in the world of balance here. Deathly Chill has had a big change. I do want to talk about this. It's basically lost all of its flavor now. I think it's a real shame. So Deathly Chill was the Grandmaster, one of my favorite Grandmasters that were added in Elite Specializations altogether, just for its flavor. And this was the Grandmaster that made Chill start doing damage. Great idea for a trait. Really interesting for Reaper, who's very chill themed. But they just haven't been able to balance it in the right place. We've seen this been tweaked over and over and over again. And Arenanet, I guess, just didn't like it in the end. I would love more information from them about this change. But it's lost all of its flavor now. Chill no longer does damage. Instead, it's when you apply Chill, you apply 8 bleeds as well. So it's still kind of like you're doing damage when you're applying Chill, but it's all getting stacked in the bleeds, which does change a lot of things with the way Condi cleanses and so on works. I guess in terms of open world stuff, it makes Necros better, because as far as I understand it, only one Necromancer could ever be applying the damage from the Chill, while now it's just going to be insane bleed stacks in giant meta events and PvE. But make no mistake, this was not a change because of PvE, this was a change because of PvP, and they just couldn't balance such a cool trait, and now we don't have it anymore. Moving on to Ranger. We knew about this already. The Ranger auto attack has been changed across the board. You can now move. You don't lose control while using it. Search and Rescue did get a nerf. I was absolutely expecting to. Lots of people using this to great advantage. It's still a really powerful skill. It's got a higher cooldown, so you have to be more tactical about when you use it. And it's got a reduced range, so you have to move in closer and be more tactical about where you use it. They've also upped short bow damage. Path of Scars is actually now ground target. This is your axe offhand. And the other change for axe offhand that I quite liked is Whirling Defense activates quicker, so you don't have to stand there like a prat for ages. It does more damage, and it started scaling with quickness too. So I'm looking forward to seeing some Axe Offhand Ranger shenanigans. Over on Thief, one of the general things that was buffed were pistols. Unload, for example, now grants might. There were animation improvements for it. Because of the quickness and slow changes, Heartseeker will now be affected by these. The Venom healing trait has been improved quite substantially, I think up to 50%. And they had a big rework for one of their traits, lead attacks, which now gives up to a 15% damage bonus as you spend initiative. So that's going to change a bit of gameplay there when you're using lead attacks. And then the last profession that I'm going to pick out here, I think the only one I skipped really is Revenant, because nothing really jumped at me. Don't hate me, Revenant players. But with Warrior, though all of these changes you guys have seen here has been like massive cooldown reductions and just general buffs in terms of offensive skills, Warrior is kind of the opposite of that. So a lot of it's been about adding offense, making the game deadlier. Warrior just cannot compete right now because it gets no quality of life and everyone is massively out damaging it, right? The power creep that was introduced with Elite Specializations and Heart of Thorns, Warrior just did not get enough to deal with it, so a lot of Warrior's defensive things have been buffed here, and it's pretty interesting to see. So, for example, like Defy Pain, their trait that makes them invulnerable to damage, used to proc when they were almost going to die, now it procs at half of their health, for example. Lots of just general things to improve Warrior's sustain, and stuff like Eviscerate. Eviscerate now will always go the full distance, and movement impairing things won't hurt you when you're trying to use Eviscerate. So even more little changes, hoping that people will start to use the axes. Keep going, Arenanet. I want to see the axes too. Axes are just too cool on Warriors. So yeah, that's generally the idea. Lots of recharges have been dropped. I'm always kind of curious about that. I feel like in Guild Wars 2, all players at all times have access to so many things. It makes the game really hard to read and understand from like a spectator perspective, even outside of the skill effects. And Arenanet seem to just generally keep playing into that more and more and more. Instead of making these skills more powerful or giving them more flavor or giving them a more specific and useful niche, instead of doing any of that to buff skills, they're just dropping recharges to make everything even more accessible. And I do wonder about that, and I'm curious what you guys think, whether that's generally a good thing for them to be doing, or you'd rather see these buffs come in a different way. Obviously, one way is far easier for them to implement, though, and that would be the reduction of the recharges. Okay, and so I'm going to end the video here, guys, just talking a little bit about Heart of Thorns general changes. And again, this could be a video of its own, but as I talk to you right now, I've already been recording 40 minutes. So, remember what I said at the start from Mo. This is the quote. It's a rework of many parts of Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns. Sort of a second take on the expansion. This is about reducing grind, making rewards more accessible, giving you more things to do in the map, making it easier to group up with people, playing on your own time. So one of the big things that they talked about straight away is XP gain. XP gain has been increased by 50% for pretty much everything. So enemies now give 50% more experience, events give a lot more. Diminishing returns has also gone away, which they say overall is resulting in about another 30% of increased experience gain on top of the 50 that they've already talked about. So massive amounts of more experience here. People should be getting through their masteries way quicker than they were at the launch of Heart of Thorns. My experience at the launch of Heart of Thorns was particularly skewed because I used a lot of boosters, and that made it really easy. And now even those new players coming in who just buy the game and pop their level 80 boost, for example, even those people can experience the faster rates without having to use a lot of boosters. But generally, what they're doing is they're giving us a lot more currencies from the maps. There are new chests, for example, that will appear while you complete the event chains. There are new items that they've added for defeating various map bosses, and those items give you a choice of other items like ascended crafting materials and other valuable goods. There are new items available from the mastery vendors for all this new stuff they're giving us that allow you to expand your personal home instance even further, and I love those kinds of rewards. The adventures are way easier to access, are open far more often, have been rebalanced so you can get gold on them a bit easier. Don't forget the change I already talked about with the adventures with the leaderboards. They have increased rewards now. Dailies have a whole new set of Heart of Thorns specific dailies for people who own the expansion, and adventures will factor into those. You now get rewarded for the events themselves, basically, instead of the whole chains. And this has happened across the board. There's a lot of patch notes basically describing this general principle here. There's a lot of changes to waypoints. So waypoints are more available now. For example, during Verdant Brink nighttime, all the waypoints are just going to be available at all times. So there you go. It's much easier to move around and organize things now. There have been sweeping changes to the Dragon Stand as well, in where you get noxious pods. There's now 20 minutes at the end of the map that you can wander around. All those areas in the Dragon Stand that were locked off until the meta is completed are now just open at all times. And here's the cool thing that I think gets buried in all the notes. A lot of people don't talk about, and I guess I'll end my video with. There are actually new events in Heart of Thorns now. New content, new actual events. So they talk about repeatable kill events that appear around Jakaritsu and various places all over the jungle. So there is more content and there is more to do and see and explore and be rewarded for in the jungle that is not constantly being tied to the global metas that are going on. And those are going to be very interesting to play. It will be really interesting actually to go back through with a new character now and check some of this stuff out. In a lot of ways, I'm happy I didn't go for a legendary yet, a Heart of Thorns legendary, because I wouldn't get to, you know, experience all these lovely perks and improvements that have now got in. And I guess when I do finally go for a legendary, such as the new one that's been added with this patch, by the way, the short bow, I'll get to get that quality of life there and do a proper assessment. Whew. So there you go, guys. My throat is sore. I hope you found it. Believe me, this is abridged. Believe me, there is a lot we've skipped over here. I hope you found this somewhat useful, though. This has probably been the most exciting patch of the game since the expansion itself came out. How I wish it had come out just a matter of months or even weeks after Heart of Thorns. How I wish Heart of Thorns had released in this state. But, you know, shoulda, woulda, coulda. It doesn't really mean too much. I don't believe too much in the idea that it's too little, too late. And I hope what this will do is encourage a lot more people to try out the expansion. And I hope what this will do is allow Arenanet to see what is good right from the start with their next one. So there you go, guys. Was there anything that I didn't mention here that really took you by surprise? Is there anything you feel that was a really awesome or a really terrible change that I'm just not picking up on here? And what were your general impressions? I didn't think there'd be this much. And suddenly, I'm really excited about the summer quarterly update too. Which should be also very interesting, right? Especially considering we'll be right on the cusp of Living World returning at that point. Anyway, thanks very much, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Get in there, check out some of the changes, and I will see you tomorrow because I got a whole load of things on my list to do. Subscribing and World vs. World and Fractals, and I can do dungeons again. Maybe even go for the legendary short bow. Jesus Christ. Anyway, thanks, guys. Hope you enjoyed. See you tomorrow. Structures for building actual legit floating islands and building your own areas of content, creating entirely artificial zones. We don't know whether the next patch is just going to add a bunch of random little decorations like we've seen with the crappy little raid decorations that we've had going on. So because of this, it puts a lot of focus on the Super Adventure Box right now. It means that those super clouds you can currently get, those furniture coins you can currently get in Super Adventure Box, you want to fill up on those as hard as possible. You don't want it to be that in 6 months' time, when you want to make another awesome, huge project, you know, maybe you want to, and this is theoretically possible, maybe you want to just plaster at